And welcome back to The Watchman from Washington, D.C. He's called the Prime Minister of Israel a terrorist, and he's called Israel a terrorist state. I'm not talking about the leader of Hamas, Hezbollah, or Iran. I'm talking about the leader of Turkey, a NATO member nation. Turkey is playing an increasingly negative role, to say the least, in Middle East affairs today. And we sat down with one of the world's top experts on the region, Ilan Berman of the American Foreign Policy Council, right here in Washington, D.C., to talk about all the latest with the Russia-Iran-Turkey alliance. Folks, not a good thing for America or Israel. Take a look. You've written extensively about Russia. Talk about Vladimir Putin's aims and goals in Syria. Why is he there, and what are his long-term ambitions in the region?
Right. So I think sort of if you wind the clock back to September of 2015, which was when Putin announced formally the military intervention, the Russians were in danger at that time of losing their foothold in the Middle East, right? Ever since the early 1970s, the Russians had, through their condominium with the Assad regime, with the regime of Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafez, built a strategic foothold in the Eastern Mediterranean in the port city of Tartus. And at that time, in September of 2015, you had a situation where the Russians had the potential to lose that basing ability, right? The situation was that dire for the Assad regime. And so they went in there, in part, to secure their military foothold, and they've done exactly that. But most of all, they're in Syria, and they're going to remain in Syria because the best defense is a good offense.
There's another actor there in Syria, Ilan, that's Turkey. Now, Iran and Russia and Turkey, kind of strange bedfellows, I guess you would say, but they recently had a summit where the leaders of those three countries met. Tell us about this coalition. What does it mean?
Because the tide of battle in Syria has really shifted, and it's shifted in favor of the Assad regime and of sort of this new order, the Iranians and the Russians and the Turks are seeking to capitalize on it, right? The simplest way I could put it is they want to stay in Syria, but they don't want to pay. And so what they're creating is they're creating a political environment where they're going to be in charge of the way power flows in the country. They're going to be in charge of mobility. They're going to sort of use the territory for mop-up operations against Russian radicals or against anti-Turkish radicals. But then they're going to ask more and more for the United States and for the Europeans to help pitch in financially with post-conflict reconstruction. This is a strategic space that the Russians and the Iranians and increasingly the Turks now own, but they don't want to pay for it, and they want us to subsidize their new sort of proxy environment.
Interesting. They want to run the country along, but they want us to pay for it. Brings me to our last question. What does all this mean, the Turkey-Russia-Iran alliance in Syria? What does it mean for Israel, first of all, but also for the West?
Right. So this is really the key question. For the Israelis, this is an increasingly hostile environment. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been to Moscow, I think, 5 times in the last 2 years. And every time, his request to Vladimir Putin was the same. Build me a moat. Essentially, build me a fire line so that the conflict in Syria and the instability in Syria doesn't extend to the south, doesn't sort of migrate southward and impact my territory. But the more Iran is entrenched, the more Russia is unable to really sort of control the forces on the ground, the less able Putin is to really build Israel that moat. And that's why you're seeing Israeli cross-border incursions to send a clear signal to the Syrians, but more than anything else to the Iranians, that you're not allowed to stay, you're not welcome here, and we will not permit an Iranian presence.
Ilan, thank you so much. You made a complex region very easy to understand. Thank you, my friend. We appreciate it. Thanks, Ilan. Thanks again to Ilan Berman for that great overview of all the latest developments in the Middle East. Well, coming up next, we head to the Middle East, to the land of Israel, to join a group of current and former NFL players on an amazing journey through the Holy Land. It's a life changer, folks. You will not want to miss this. Stick around.